Well, uh, as you know already, today Devin Knight is gonna present advanced Power BI solving the hard problems. Before Devin present, I'd like to go through a few things, then transfer the screen over to Devin. By the way, this session is gonna be recorded, and then we'll post the recording on YouTube. So exciting news for the PASS community. As you may know already, PASS is gonna launch its new brand and website, which reflect our growing community of data professionals. Basically, instead of calling uh, local chapters or virtual chapters, we change it to local groups and virtual groups. And there will be new look, new names, and same great PASS community. PASS store is still open if you would like to order stuff. There's some selected. Here are some selected virtual chapter meetings. You can go to sqlpass.org/events to get detailed information. Oops. Um, our future virtual group meetings in February, Andy Yun is gonna present why your data type choices matter. In April, Haidong Ji is gonna present initial impressions of SQL Server v.NET .next public preview. Then in May, Barbara Rainey is gonna present Power BI 0 to dashboard in an hour. PASS has many virtual groups cover different areas. You're welcome to join as many virtual groups as you would like. Of course, we would like you to join our virtual chat group if you are not a member already. Our group is called Saturday Night SQL Virtual Group. There are some upcoming SQL Saturdays, which is a very good meeting to go to. Some say like February 25th. There's some you may want to check it out. And PASS is mostly running by volunteers. So if you would like to volunteer, please visit volunteer.sqlpass.org. And our virtual chapter are looking for speakers. So if you would like to present for our virtual chapter, feel free to reach out to us by email us at Saturday Night SQL at sqlpass.org. And stay involved. You may sign up for a completely free membership today if you are not a PASS member, and join as many virtual chapter or local group as you like. How to ask the questions during our session. If you would like to interact with Devin directly, please raise your hand. We'll unmute you, and you can ask your questions directly. Another way to ask your question would be type your question in the chat window. I'll read them out for you. Thank you. Let me transfer the screen back to Devin. And as you know already, Devin is a very good speaker and had wrote like big books. And he presented in many events for this past community. We really appreciate Devin Saturday night to present for our virtual chapter.
Great, I'm happy to. All right. All right. Well, thank you guys for the nice introduction, and I hope you guys enjoy the session tonight. So you guys are some pretty dedicated people showing up on Saturday night to be able to learn something. So that's great, and I'm sure many of you do other past events like SQL Saturday that was brought up just a few moments ago. I'm sure you guys already do a lot of those if you're dedicated to do a Saturday night session with me. So, first of all, welcome, and I'm excited to share with you something. Hopefully, you'll learn at least something new from this session. But we're going to be looking at a lot of Power BI, different intricate topics, and we're going to be focusing in on some of the more difficult topics, or really, I should say, kind of just going beyond the basics. So many of you have probably seen Power BI sessions that take you through some of the basics of being able to create a dashboard and some reports and doing some data extracts. Well, what I'd like to do, and my goal with the session, is to really take you beyond those basics and show you some of the more details or more difficult problems that you might run into. So that's why it's Advanced Power BI Solving the Hard Problems is what we're going to talk about tonight. You can see my contact information here on the below. My name is Devin Knight. I'm pretty active on Twitter, and you also have my email address here as well if you'd like to reach out later for any questions that maybe we just run out of time to talk about. Just a little bit more about myself here. I'm the training director at Pragmatic Works. So we do a lot of training, whether live taught training or kind of previously recorded on-demand training. We do that as well. I'm also a Microsoft Data Platform MVP. Like Sarah mentioned, I've written several books, most of them around SQL Server and BI. And I also run a local group, a local user group out of Jacksonville, Florida. So I'm from Florida. I'm not sure how many West Coasters we have tonight. I know our leaders are from the West Coast here. And then I also blog at a website called devinknightsql.com. I mentioned that because I might reference it a few times, and you may want to take a look at it because there is going to be some good reference material that you can find there later. Okay. All right, so here's kind of our plan for tonight. I have three main topics that we're going to cover, and again, thinking about the topic here, going advanced with Power BI, you might be joining us tonight just because you're curious of what are some advanced things that you can do with Power BI, because overall, Power BI is a pretty intuitive tool, and you can solve a lot of problems fairly easily with Power BI. And so what we're going to do tonight is talk about some of those more difficult problems, and we're going to really focus our attention in on what we can do within inside of the Power BI desktop that might be difficult. We'll touch on the Power BI service one or two times, but we're really focused in on the different aspects of the Power BI desktop that might seem or might appear to be difficult in some aspects. So we're going to start by solving some data import problems. So that's all about the query editor inside of the Power BI desktop. We're then going to get into solving some data modeling problems. So data modeling, more of that Power Pivot if you're familiar with the Excel side, but really it's not referred to as Power Pivot inside of the Power BI desktop, but more that modeling and organization side of things. And then finally, we'll end with some data visualization problems. Now, this session's quite a bit of content in here, so I know we got about an hour and a half where we can get some questions at the end. I'm going to try and keep under that hour so I can have as much time for questions, but there's a lot of stuff in here. If you're interested in anything later that you'd like from me, don't worry, I'll be happy to send it out to you. It doesn't really bother me to share my material here. All right, so the first thing that we're going to look at, though, is going to be more around the data import problems. And so we're going to talk about what are some of the more complex problems that you might deal with, and I have a couple scenarios here that we'll talk about, and then we'll talk about how you can solve some of those problems, okay? So the first set of problems that we're going to look at, like I said, they're all data import problems that we're going to focus in on first. And the problems that we're going to attempt to solve are going to be around things like turning reports into data sources. Okay, so the idea here being that maybe I have a vendor system that sends me a report once a week or once a day, and I want to turn that report that my vendor sends me into an actual data source. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a data source that I have that's really formed as more of a report, and we're going to transform it into something that's more usable as a data source inside of Power BI. So we're going to walk you through kind of the scenario there. Then we're also going to talk about running more efficient queries. So how can we make sure the queries that we're running inside of Power BI are at the most optimal performance that they can be, and that we'll be talking about a feature called query folding. Okay. Then finally, we'll talk about making queries dynamic. There's a section in here where we'll talk about things like parameters and templates that you have available inside of Power BI, and those features allow you to really make a data extract dynamic. Okay. So the first thing that we're going to look at is all about turning report data into a data source. Okay, and so I've given you an example of what I'm talking about here on the screen. Just imagine, if you will, here that this is an extract that you get from a vendor system you have. Okay, and so in this vendor system that I have, I can see that I have subtotal rows. Okay, and they happen to be up at the top. So I can see London, and that London value aggregates all the values I have for my employees, and so I'm seeing the salary for all of London. And then I see New York in here also as a subtotal, and then I see New York is actually at the aggregated or summed up value of all the values below it. And so I have these subtotal values, and I want to take these subtotal values. My goal is I actually want to take those city names and make them into a brand new column so I can see which city each of these individuals are coming from. So my goal is to take what I see here on the screen now and transform it into something more that looks like this. It's the same exact data. There's just no subtotal. And so I'm removing the subtotal row, and I'm now seeing this city column that appears that we've made. And I want to make that city column in here using the Power BI query editor. Okay, so that's going to be our goal, is to convert those subtotals into something that's more appropriate here for a data source. Okay, so that's our first demonstration we're going to do. We're going to jump pretty quickly into some demonstrations here. So our first one is kind of dealing with this data import problem where we want to turn what is actually an ending report into a proper data source in Power BI. All right, so first things first, I'm going to go ahead and launch the Power BI desktop. And if you're pretty new to Power BI, if you just haven't done a whole lot with Power BI Desktop is the application that we're going to use for developing our Power BI solutions. And you can download it for free by going to powerbi.com. So if you go to powerbi.com, you'll find the free download, which is what I'm using here. And there is a paid service whenever you actually want to publish these items or publish these things that you create and you want to refresh the data. There is a paid component of the service as well that we'll kind of not talk about today because that's more of an intro topic. All right, so I've launched the Power BI desktop. I'm going to close this little startup menu that opens up for us. And we're going to begin by going to get some data that we'll use for this example. And so to get started here, of course, if we want to pull some data into the Power BI desktop, we'll go up to the top section here where it says Get Data. And we'll use that to be able to bring in the data that we're going to be using for this example. All right, so I'll go ahead and select Get Data. And we're going to be pulling data from Excel. Now, the example that we're going to be using here is going to be coming from my presentations folder. So let me go there, right here. And I'm going to go ahead and select from my past folder because this is actually a past presentation that I've done before. We'll pull in this file with groupings example here. I'm going to go ahead and open this file. I'll see this is going to launch open the Navigator pane, and this just simply lets me navigate through the different spreadsheets that I have in this workbook. And I only have one spreadsheet in this example where it's called Vendor Report. So I'll go ahead and select Vendor Report and then click Edit to launch open the query editor. If I hit load, by the way, so just to show you down here in the bottom, if I hit load, that's immediately going to load the data that you see above into the data model. If I hit edit, that's actually going to allow me to do some data transformations and apply some business rules to the data before I load it into the data model. So we want to do the edit option here in this scenario. All right, so I'm going to select edit. And that's going to launch open the query editor. And it's going to allow me to now view the data in the query editor, and I can start doing some data manipulation here. So you can take a look here. If you wanted me to zoom in here, you can see here's my subtotal rows. So my subtotal rows are the city names. So you can see London in here again. You can see New York in here as a subtotal row. So these values have been brought in here, and they're visualized in the query editor as basically a null row or a null record row that's really my subtotals. Okay. So what I'd like to do, though, is I want to get rid of those subtotal rows, and I want to create a brand new column here that really indicates what the city name is for each row that I have inside of this data set. So to do that, there's really one way to make this happen, and it's by writing a small little M script. M is the query language that's used behind the scenes inside the query editor. M, it's just the letter M, by the way, stands for mashup. It's a mashup language. It's used for doing data transformations like we're going to be using here. Now, there are a lot of ways that you can avoid writing M. M is a pretty new language for a lot of people. In fact, this is what it looks like. If I hit the advanced editor, you can kind of see what it looks like. And it's kind of nasty. It's not something that you would just want to open up and start writing yourself, but it is something that if you look at it long enough, you can kind of figure out what it's doing. But typically what you'll find is by using the interface here inside of the query editor, it can solve about 90 to 95% of your problems without you ever having to write any M yourself. In this particular scenario, we do need to write a little bit of M because we're going to do something kind of advanced here. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to say anytime we see the value of null, oops, sorry, don't want to put that break up. Anytime we see a value of null under the position column, we're going to assume that's a subtotal. And so we can see that this is a subtotal row, this is a subtotal row. If I scroll down, this is a subtotal row as well. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to think about this logically first. Before we go jump into writing any code, we're going to think through our process here. We're going to say that anytime we see the position column have a value of null, we know that that means that this is actually a subtotal row, and we want to take the value of name and bring it over into a new column. We're trying to basically isolate the city name by itself without the individual's names here. All right, so let me show you what I mean by that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up to the top ribbon inside the query editor, and we'll select to add a column. When we select add a column, you'll see there's a couple different ways that you can add a column.
Devin. Hello? Hey, Devin. We couldn't see your screen now. Devin, we cannot hear you. Give me a second. Let me pin him. Hey, Devin, are you there? Can you hear me? Sorry, Devin, we can't hear you. Okay, hi everybody, this is Sarah. I'm trying to get hold of Devin and see if he could fix his audio, his speaker, sorry.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes, we
There
can
we
hear
go.
you. Welcome back.
Sorry about that. You know what I did, which is kind of silly? I happened to hit the hotkey and it put my machine into sleep.
Ah, no wonder our screen turned black.
Yeah, sorry about that. So,
That's okay. Do you mind to go back a little bit, maybe a couple of minutes back?
sure, not a problem. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. I just I hit a hotkey and it put my machine to sleep. So yeah, I think I know where I stopped. I'll kind of pick up right where I left off.
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right, sorry guys. Thanks for your patience there. All right, so what we were talking about is we kind of walked through logically what we wanted to do. We wanted to make it so that we had a new column here that had the city listed in it. And so we talked a little bit about how we could do that, just briefly. We got started talking about that at least, is we can come up to the top ribbon here underneath the Add Column section, and then that allows us to actually write a little bit of that language called M, I mentioned earlier, that we can create a brand new column that doesn't already exist. Okay, so what I can do here is I can actually hit the Custom Column, and that allows us to create a brand new column that doesn't even exist yet. And what we can do in here is we can write a little bit of that M language. It's pretty simple, at least what we want to do here. It's going to be a matter of doing a little if statement. And so I would write if the position right here. So you can see the columns that we can use from the data source that we're currently using. So we can actually say if the position is null, then we want to return back the name column. Okay, like so. And we'll add a little space here. We'll say else return back null. All right, so basically what we're saying here is if the position column is null, which we kind of identified a few moments ago, is that's how we know if it's a subtotal or not. But if the position column is null, then we want to return back the name column. Else, just return back null. So take a look what happens when we do this. If I hit OK here, it's going to create a brand new column here for me. Brand new here. It's called a custom column, and we can rename it, of course, here. We could have done it in the editor we were just looking at. But this new column allows us to now have a little bit more fun where we can actually see that this is our list of cities, or we're going to create a list of cities here. And the way that we're going to make this really a list of cities where we can see each individual and the city that they're from is by using another transform that we have inside of Power BI called fill down. Fill down's a pretty nice one. Check out what fill down does. If I select the custom column here, so I'm just going to select the column that we just created a moment ago, and then I'm going to go up to the transform ribbon this time. So back up in the ribbon here where you see transform, we're going to select and we're going to choose that we want to do a fill down. And basically what fill down does is it sees a value. You can kind of tell here from the icon here that it indicates is it's going to see the value of the city name right here, and it's going to duplicate that city name all the way down until it sees a value to replace it with. So check this out. If I click on fill, oh, I did the wrong one. I meant to do fill up. Let's try that again. If I do fill down, check out what happens here with my data. You can see that in that column that we just created, it duplicates the value for city all the way down until there's a value to replace it with. And whenever it finds a value to replace it with, it starts with the new value and duplicates it all the way down until there's another value to replace it with. So we use a combination of a couple advanced things. One, we wrote a little bit of an M statement using an if. And then we also created a new column here called city, which we'll go ahead and rename city, with our value that we had from our subtotal row, and we've duplicated the value all the way down. Now, if we want to get rid of that subtotal row, if we don't really want the subtotal row, we can simply filter out the column that has the null in it. And if we filter out the null value from the position column here, you can see we get rid of the subtotal rows, and then now we can just bring this into a report as it is and build out a nice visual on top of it. Okay, so that's kind of our first quick little example. Sorry, it kind of got broken up there by my machine shutting down or going to sleep. But that's the first one I want to show you here as we get started. The next example that I want to show you is I'm actually going to close this one out. And you can, by the way, you can build a visual on top of this, but really the key thing was more around building out the query and making it so that we can take that subtotal row and make something more valuable out of it. So the next one that I want to show you is we're going to go connect to a new data set. And in this data set that we're going to have, we're going to actually show you how query folding works. Now, if you're not really familiar with how query folding works, I have one slide to kind of talk through this. So let me pull up that slide here for a moment. The cool thing about how query folding works is it's just something that's natural within inside of Power BI. It's not really something that you have to configure, although it is something that you can leverage if you choose things wisely. Okay, so basically the idea behind query folding is this. Let's say that you have a data source you're trying to pull in some data from, and that data source has billions of rows in it. Okay, maybe it's a fact table or it's a transactional table that you have that has billions and billions of records that have been there for years. And for the purposes of the report that you're building, you really only need the last 6 months worth of that data. Okay, and the last 6 months worth of that data might just be a few 100,000 rows. Okay. So what query folding does, and the idea behind query folding, is whenever it goes to query that table that has billions of rows in it, and you apply a filter on it to just bring back the last 6 months of that data, it'll actually apply the filter on the server and not on your client machine, not on your laptop, not on your desktop. So the idea here with query folding is it allows you to push all the work from your query back to the server and it churn through and do the filtering on the server as opposed to doing the filter on your laptop. That's a big deal because think of if it didn't do this, if it didn't actually do this operation of query folding, it would import that billions and billions of rows across the network onto your laptop and then apply the filter on your machine as opposed to doing it on the server. So your laptop obviously is not going to be as good at churning through and filtering down billions of rows as a server would. Now, query folding doesn't work all the time. There's some caveats to when query folding does not take place. Some of those caveats have to do with things like the type of source system you're pulling from. So for example, query folding would not take place if you were pulling in data from something like a text file or a CSV file. If you're pulling in data from like a text file, there's not really any place for it to push the query back to. There's no server, right? It's just a text file. And so because there's no server to run the query against, it just has to do it on your client machine. There's no other option for you. But if I was doing a query against a database system like SQL Server or Oracle or Teradata, for example, then it does have options to actually push back that logic and push back that operation back to the server and do any kind of filtering on the server side as opposed to your client side. Now, there's also some transforms that don't allow query folding to take place. All right, so for example, there might be something that you're doing in your Power BI query editor that just doesn't exist inside the source system. To give you an example of what I mean by that is you might be connecting to a data source that you feel the need to do a transform called capitalize each word. Capitalize each word is a transform that's built into the Power BI query editor. But if you wanted to do that, you would have to do that more on the client side because there is no capitalize each word T-SQL statement that you can do. There's nothing equivalent to that outside of you writing your own kind of custom function in SQL Server. So because of that, there's some transforms that just cannot be folded. And you should really be aware of some of those transforms. I'm going to show you an example of that here in a few moments because whenever you have transforms that can't be folded, then you're probably going to want to change the order of the transforms that you're doing because that can actually help and benefit you. The last thing I'll mention here about query folding is not an all or nothing thing. And what I mean by that is you can actually have a partially folded query, meaning that some of the query is done on the server side and some of it is done on your client side. Now, the caveat to that is whenever you have a partially folded query, as soon as it hits a step, like a transform that can't be folded back to the server, then everything after that point is going to be done on your client machine. Okay? So let's go ahead and take a look at how this works. I'm going to go ahead and launch back open our Power BI desktop. And I'm going to go connect to a SQL Server instance in this example. So I'm going to go over to get data from SQL Server, which we know is a server that I can have query folding take place in. And I'm going to go ahead and connect to my local instance of a database I have here. And I'll just hit OK to make sure I select the right database name here. And we're going to go connect to our database here that I have called Wide World Importers DW. And I'm going to use the table in this example called dimension.city. Okay, not really relevant which table I select, but just so you know for our example. I'm going to choose to edit and go into the query editor and choose edit here so that I can actually manipulate this data inside of the query editor. And so what I want to show you in this example is how query folding works and how do you know whether or not it is actually working. Is there a way for you to test and validate that query folding is working? And the answer is yes, there is. So let's take a look at how we can test this out. So I gave you the example earlier. I kind of talked through the example where you're connecting to a table that maybe has billions of rows and then you apply a filter on it. And the goal of query folding is to push the logic of that filter back to the server. And what it'll actually do is it'll convert your Power BI query into a T-SQL query in this case. All right, so how do I know it's doing that? Well, let's test this out. Here's how you can test it out. I'm going to just find some column in here and apply a filter. For example, the sales territory column. I'm going to find the sales territory column and apply a basic filter on this. I'll say that I want to filter this and only see the records, let's say from the Southeast. Okay, so I'll do a filter, say filter everything down to just the Southeast records, and then I'll hit OK. All right, so what happens here is pretty basic. It just applies a filter to this. I can see that the filter has been applied. I only see the Southeast sales territory. And then if you want to validate that this has actually pushed that logic back to the server, there's a way you can do that. You can go over to the applied steps section here on the right-hand side. So the applied steps section here, if you've worked with Power BI a little bit, you've probably seen this already once before. The applied steps section is what you'll use to be able to delete transforms that you create. You can also change the order of transforms that you've created, so I can move this one up or down if I wanted to. And this is also where you can test whether or not a query is being folded. How do you do that? Well, you right-click on a step or a transform. So I would right-click on this filtered rows step here, and I would see that there's this option here called View Native Query. Now what View Native Query does is it'll actually pop open another new dialog box for me, and that dialog box will show the native T-SQL query that's being used and pushed back to my SQL server, and that way I know that it's actually applying query folding. So let's test this out. I'm going to hit View Native Query here. You'll see it opens up a native query window here for me. And what we're looking at here is a select statement. This is a SQL Server or a T-SQL select statement. It's doing some kind of interesting way of writing it here, but what you'll notice is on the bottom of it is it has a where clause that it added, and it says where sales territory equals southeast. So we know that it actually is working. We can see here that query folding is taking place because it's converted my Power BI query into a T-SQL query that's being run against the server. All right, well, how do we know if Power BI is not doing query folding? Well, let's test that out. I have another column over here called city. And you can see here that the city column is in all lower cases. It has lowercase for every value in here. And so what I'd like to do is I want to apply a transform on the city column that actually converts the value, and it's going to change it so that it does basically proper casing or capitalize the first word here, because in some cases I might have more than one word in the city name. So like Avalon Beach down here, for example. Avalon Beach, I want to make sure that both the A and the V get capitalized here. Okay, so there's a transform that I can apply on here, and I can apply that transform by right-clicking on the column name, and I'm going to tell it that I want to do a transform called capitalize each word. Now, I mentioned this transform earlier, and what's special about this transform is there's nothing in SQL Server, nothing natively at least, that exists that's comparable to a capitalize each word. You can, of course, write your own function to do this, but there's no standard T-SQL function that can do a capitalize each word on a column in T-SQL. So if I select capitalize each word here, you'll notice that it does work. It does capitalize each word. I can see Avalon Beach down here does have a capital A and a capital B, but the downfall of that is query folding is not actually going to take place. And here's how I know. If I go back over to the applied steps section, I can right-click on the capitalize each word transform that we looked at earlier. And I know that query folding is not taking place because if I right-click on this, you'll see that the View Native Query option is grayed out. And it's grayed out because you can't see it. There is no actual native query. Query folding didn't happen in this case. In fact, everything after this point will not use query folding as well. Because as soon as you hit a point where you're not folding any queries or folding any transforms, anything after that point also won't be folded. Now you can always go back. If I go back to the previous step here, the filtered row step, you can see I can still go back and look at the query from that point because everything was hunky-dory to that point. But as soon as I hit the capitalize each word, as soon as I hit that point, everything below it will no longer be folded. So let me show you what I mean by that. If I were to go to another column here and do another basic transform, maybe I right-click on state province and I do something like just an uppercase. Uppercase is pretty standard one. You can do uppercase in any T-SQL language here, or any SQL language. And so when I applied upper to my state province, you can see it did uppercase on every one of the state letters. And if I want to look at the applied steps section here again, you can see again it has the View Native Query option grayed out. Now, one thing to keep in mind is you can resort or reorder the transform. So if I were to move this up and I move uppercase above capitalize each word, notice now that you can view the native query on this because I actually moved it before the one step that caused it to not fold anymore. And so this capitalize each word transform is really a bad transform as far as performance because as soon as I hit that point, everything after it has to happen on the client side. So what you might consider doing is kind of resorting these. If you have to use something like this, capitalize each word, you might consider resorting these like I have in this case, as long as the sort order of the transform does not matter. So if uppercase can go below or above, I should say, capitalize each word, then you can resort them and it gets you a little bit added benefit here. All right, great. So that's our second demonstration here. What I'd like to show you in the next one is really a fun thing that I'm not sure many people have really played around with a whole lot yet, and it's all around using the R query language. Now, if you haven't played around with the R language quite a bit yet, R is a fun language. It looked like there was some virtual chapters that are actually going to be talking about R and its integration with SQL Server. Well, it's had some integration in with Power BI for a little while now as well. And so R inside of Power BI allows you to actually do two different things. You can use R, the R query language, in two different places. You can use it in the query editor to actually do some data manipulation, or you can also use it as a data visualization tool. There's a data visualization here for R that allows you to take data that you have, and it allows you to be able to do some kind and some form of different predictive analytics. The benefit that you get from using the R query language is it really expands what you can do in Power BI. It doesn't limit you to what you can see and the different Power BI transforms or even the M query language. It really expands what you can do by far because the R query language has a lot of components to it that you might just not have available to you inside of the Power BI desktop. So I want to show you an example of how this works. What I'm going to do is I'm going to import one more data set here, or at least another data set. In this case, it's going to be a CSV file. And I'm going to go get this from Power BI. This is just a file that I have. This is actually a Microsoft example, so you can find it on the web as well. But we're going to pull in the EU stock prices here. And what I have inside of this file is, let me show you what the file looks like. It has in it a list of days, and then it has what the stock price value was for the particular day we're looking at. But unfortunately, some days, like this day here, for example, just did not record, or maybe there was an error during the recording process where it did not record the stock market price for that day. And you can see it also happened down here on the 20th as well. And so what the R query language would allow me to do here in this case is actually look at a sampling of the data around it and replace the NA value that you see here with its best guess or its closest guess to the value that should be used. All right, so to show you how this one works, we're going to click Edit on this data source. And I've brought the data now into the Power BI editor. And what we're going to do is we're going to use an R script. Now, I've already have the R script written out because I didn't want you to have to watch me write it all out here. But it's a pretty simple little script. Now, if you haven't worked with the R language yet, I do recommend there's a couple prerequisites that you'll need to install. The best way to probably find those prerequisites is this. If you were to go up to the File menu inside of the Power BI desktop, and if you went down to Options and Settings, and then select Options, you'll see there's an option in here for R scripting. So if I select R scripting here, you'll see here where you can actually go to install R on your machine. Okay? And there's a few things that you can do here on the bottom as well, but I'm not so concerned about that right now. But if you click on this, it'll show you where you can go download the R client. It'll also walk you through any kind of prerequisites that you'll need to have installed on your machine. And then once you install the R client on your machine, you'll also want to point Power BI to your preferred R home directory. So there's actually a step where you'll need to come back in here and point it to where you installed your R home directory. The reason why you need to do that is because that's where Power BI is going to search for any libraries that you install or any packages that you install in your R library or in your R directory will be located in that spot. So you'll actually need to, after installing the R client, need to come in here and browse to the location where your R home directory is. So I've already done that here just to kind of save us a little time because we're already a good amount into our presentation here. But once I have installed the R client and pointed it to the home directory, I can start using the R scripting language. Now, a lot of the different R examples that you'll be able to find out on the web will require that you install packages. And basically, packages are different little libraries of code that you can add to your R client. And so to give you a little example of what I mean by that is I would go launch open the R client that I just downloaded from the install requirements. I showed you where to find the install requirements there inside the options menu. And so I would open up the Microsoft R client. I'm using Microsoft R. You can certainly use other R clients that are out there. But this is what the R client looks like. So it has a little R console here. This is the Microsoft R Open console that we're looking at. And what I would do whenever I find a script or I create a script that I want to be able to test out, I would install those packages or libraries here first. So my first step in this scenario is I have a little set of code that I want to use to clean up this data that we're looking at. My first step would be to actually come up here and install a little package, okay? And basically what this package is like I said earlier, it's a library of code. So I would come down here, paste this little bit of code in, and it's going to install this new library in here for me. And basically what this little library is called mice. What this little library will do for me is it'll help me find missing data, or it'll actually collect and make its best guess on replacing missing data, which in our case will be really helpful because we can see in our example that we're using right now, we have quite a bit of missing data. I can see the 15th is missing, the 20th is missing. If I would continue to scroll down here, you'll see there's other days that are missing, like the 29th, the 34th, the 40th. These are just number of days. I have a lot of missing data, and so I want to be able to use R to be able to predict what that value should have been, even though it's missing. So to do that, we'll go up to the transform ribbon up inside the Power BI query editor. And on the far right, all the way over here, you'll see there's an option called Run R Script. All right, so I'll select Run R Script, and then I'll paste in this little bit of code that I have right here. Okay, now the difference between the two different code sets that I have is the one on the top, this install.packages, and it says mice. That's installing the library that we're going to use, and then the set that I have highlighted right now is actually using that library that we just installed. Okay, so that's the difference between the two. This top portion is just for getting the library ready to go, and then this portion on the bottom is actually using that library. All right, so I'll copy this out, and I'm going to paste this into the R script here. And basically what it's doing is it's going to read in the data that we have in the column here called SMI missing values, and it's going to create a new column called completed values for me that predicts the values that should have been where I'm missing data. All right, so I'll hit OK. When I hit OK, it's going to process and run that information for me, run that query, and it's going to give me an output here. You have two different outputs you can choose from. In this case, we're going to select the one here called output, and it's going to give me a new set of values, a new output that has in it the original column here, and then the new column that's based off of the script that we just ran. So we have this new column here called completed values. That's a completely new column that didn't exist until just now, and that's actually replacing the values that were missing. So check this out. Where those columns or where those rows had missing values, it's now made its prediction on what the values should have been in place here. So this is a neat way whenever you have missing data like this to be able to do predictions and be able to still process and use that data here, even though we were missing values. So this is all about the R script, or running the R scripting language here. So I could then take this data and hit close and apply and actually start to visualize some of this if I wanted to. All right, good deal. So that's our that's really our last demo when it comes to the data querying side of things. Let's actually now talk about the data modeling side. And we have a couple things that we can show here. I'm going to kind of highlight some of these because I know we're already running out of time here. But we have two main things I want to show you. One is talking a little bit about how you can implement things like row level security. Okay, so how can I make it so that I can actually at a row level filter down the data so that certain users can see certain values. And then the other thing that we're going to talk about here is how we can add in synonyms to enhance a feature called Q&A. If you haven't seen Q&A before, that's a really cool feature. We'll talk about that here as we get going. All right, but let's first talk about row level security. All right, now row level security inside of Power BI is done by you creating roles. You create roles inside of the Power BI desktop, and then you publish your Power BI desktop file to the Power BI service, and then you can assign users to the role that you created inside of the Power BI service. And you can filter things at a row level, and you can actually have individual records that you filter, and you can even actually test out the security that you create by doing an option called impersonate roles. So let's go ahead and take a look at how this works. We're going to jump right into a demo here. I already have this example partially built out. I know we're running out of time here. So this is a simple example here. Not a whole lot fancy going on here. The only thing I'll highlight for you here as we look at it here to begin with is you'll notice that this has a list of multiple countries that we're looking at, and we're looking at sales by country here basically. And what we want to do is we want to filter this so that the only records that we see are the values from the United States. Okay, so we want to filter this down to just my US sales representative. And we want to make it so that we create a security role, so anytime that individual logs in, they only see the data that's relevant to them. Okay, so that's kind of the goal of what we're doing in this example. All right, so to show you how this works, we're going to go up to the top ribbon up in the very top here. You'll see in the top ribbon here you have three options. You have a home ribbon, a view ribbon, and a modeling ribbon. The security settings are all going to be found underneath the modeling ribbon. So underneath modeling, you'll find this option here, this set of options underneath security. And you're going to select that you want to manage roles here. So I would click on manage roles, and it would pop open a new dialog box for us here where we can create a new role. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and select that I want to create a new role here. And when we tell it that we want to create a new role, we'll tell it, first of all, we'll give the role a name. So let's call this my US sales rep. Okay. And then we'll tell it, how do we want to filter this role? Well, I want to filter this role based on the sales territory. We just talked about it a moment ago. I want to filter so that we only see the country values that equal the United States. And so what I would do in here is I would tell it that I want to add a filter. Let me zoom in on this so you can see. I'm trying to be very careful zooming in. That's how I put my machine to sleep earlier. So I would go underneath the sales territory. You click the little ellipses here, and I would add a filter, and I would add a filter on the country column. Okay, and I would tell it that I want to filter the country to only show when the value here is United States. And so that would allow me to filter this just for that particular entity here inside of my data model. Now, when I hit save, it's going to save this definition into my model. So I'll hit save here. And then it doesn't really make any change here initially, but if you want to test out and see what it just did, you can hit this option up here in the top called View as Roles right here. And if you click that View as Roles option, you can tell it that you want to test out that new role that you just created called US Sales Rep. So if I select US Sales Rep here and hit OK, you'll see that you're now looking at a filtered view of the report based on the security model that you just created. Now that's nice. You know, it's nice that you're able to do that. It's nice that you're able to test out the role, but you'll notice that you haven't really assigned any users to it. When you want to assign a user to this role, and I just stopped the impersonation there, when you want to test out the security model and assign users to it, you have to assign users to it from the Power BI service. And so what I would do is I would go to the home ribbon here. Let me sign in real quickly. So I would sign into my Power BI account. Okay, and I'll give it my password. Okay, and once I sign in, you should see my name up top here, and I can hit publish now, and I can publish this to the Power BI service. It's going to ask me to save it locally here as well, but I'm going to go ahead and publish this to a work group that I have here called past session, and I'll hit select. And it's now going to publish it off to the Power BI service. And so what I can do next to actually assign users to that role is I can go over to my web browser. I'll see if I refresh my web browser here, I should see a new data set that's been added. I'm just refreshing here. And I can see here now that the row level security data set we just published appears. And if I want to apply security to it or assign users to it, I can hit the little ellipses next to the row level security and then select security. So if you're ever kind of curious, if you kind of forget the steps on what to do inside of Power BI, there's a lot of ellipses everywhere. If you ever get lost, click the ellipses. You'll probably find what you're really looking to do here. In this case, if I click the ellipses next to row level security and select security, that'll take me to where I want to go. So I'll click on security here. And you can see here that I have my US sales rep role. Again, we created that role inside of the Power BI desktop. And then we can start to assign either users or groups. Usually you would want to assign groups to this, so you're not having to assign individual users. But I can assign either users or groups to this role. And so, for example, if I assign someone like Ken Wood, this a coworker of mine, if I assign him to this and hit add, you'll see that there now is one individual that is in here as a US sales rep. And so what will happen once I save this is he'll now be able to view this report using that particular security sales role that I've assigned on it. You can also test this role out if you hit the ellipses here again. So you'll notice here there's another set of ellipses right here. If I click those ellipses, I can hit test as role, and it'll allow me to test it from the Power BI service as well. And so again, I'm able to see this data now filtered down inside of my web browser through the Power BI service. Okay? So that's how the row level security can be implemented here. And by the way, this ties in with your Azure Active Directory. That's actually what you just saw there a moment ago was my Azure Active Directory, and I'm assigning it to individuals that are part of my Azure Active Directory. All right, so that's row level security inside of Power BI. The next thing that I want to show you guys, though, is also an interesting one, which is called synonyms. And so let's just actually jump, rather than showing some slides on this, let's actually show you what synonyms are. If you haven't seen synonyms before, here's what synonyms are. It's a really cool feature. Basically, the idea of synonyms here is it allows you to actually type in text. It's almost like Google or Bing for your data. So if I were to type in something like total units, so let's just say total units in United States, and this is inside the Power BI dashboard, I can type in total units in the United States. It recognizes a field in here called USA. It'll convert it to that for me. It'll say total units in USA, and I can see the total units that I sold in the USA. That's how Q&A works. You do it from a dashboard. So here's my dashboard, and then you have this little section up top here where you can ask a question about your data. So I asked for total units sold. I could also say, let's see total units sold by operating system. And so it tells me here that the total units I sold by operating system, it has iOS, Android, Linux, and other, and it has here a graph that is automatically created for me. That's how Q&A works. You type in a question about your data or some text about your data, and it'll actually return back a visualization here that shows you that information depicted. Now, the problem with Q&A is it's not always super intelligent. There's some cases where you might ask something that it's just not able to figure out. So let me show you an example of what I mean by that. Let's say I wanted to see something like total units by product. This will work. If I ask for total units by product, you'll see that I have tablets and phones, and so it's showing me the total units sold by product category. Okay, and it's doing that well. But if I were to say something like total units sold by device, which is another common nomenclature for products, you'll notice that it doesn't really work. It's actually just showing me all the units sold here. So the problem is I'm using a nomenclature about the data that Power BI doesn't know about. And there's a way that we can fix this, but the problem is this is a certain way I talk about the data, and the column name that I have inside the data source or inside of my Power BI solution just isn't using that column name. And so because of that, there's something that we'll want to implement inside of the Power BI desktop to actually recognize other names that we might use. Things like total units by device, I want it to be able to recognize that. So I have an example of this here. I'm going to bring up the, let's see, where did it go? Synonyms example right here. So what we're going to do in this scenario is we're going to create what's called a synonym on that particular column. We're going to create a synonym on the product category, and what that synonym will do is it'll tell Power BI that there's multiple ways that we refer to this particular column. So if someone says product, they'll be able to see that information. If someone says device, they'll also be able to see that information. So the way that you can create synonyms is underneath the relationship view. So you have to come over here first and select the relationships view. So I'll do that here. And then once you're in the relationships view, you'll need to go underneath the modeling ribbon and select synonyms. So, okay, so 2 steps. 1, go to the relationships view. And then 2, go to the modeling ribbon and select synonyms. So really 3 steps there, I guess. All right, now once you go to the modeling ribbon and select synonyms, you'll see this appear on the right-hand side. You'll see this little synonyms sidebar appear over on the right-hand side. And what we'll be able to do with that is we'll actually be able to select either tables or column names and create alternate names for them as individuals might identify them whenever they're interacting with the data. So I can select a table. You'll see the table name and all the columns below it. So in this case, we want to go to the table here called tablet sales. And what I want to do is I want to create a synonym on the column here called product category. Right here, there's a product category column. And what we'll do is we'll create another version of that column name, and we'll call it devices or device. Okay? And so this way, we'll be able to refer to it as product category or product and device. I could even do something like this. I can create a synonym called Saturday Night Sequel. Kind of silly to do that, but I can even create as many synonyms as I want. You do a comma-separated list of all the synonyms or all the columns that you might want to refer to this column name right here as. All right, so here's what we'll do. Now that we've created a couple synonyms, I'm going to hit enter on that first before I move on. And I'll make sure I save this. and we're going to republish this model back out to the Power BI service. So I'm going to hit publish to send this back off to the Power BI service once again. And hopefully this will let me sign in. When I went through my demos earlier, this kind of froze up on me and I had to restart. So let's see if that will eventually come back here. It looks like it's going to act up on me again. Let's try and kill that one more time. There we go. I'll launch that again. It seems like if I don't sign in ahead of time, it gives me some fits occasionally. So let's go back here, and I'm going to launch open that example one more time. And I'm going to sign in before we make those changes this time. All right, sorry about that, guys. I had it open. Let me sign in before I attempt to make those changes again. Okay. And I'll sign in one more time. All right. So I've got this back open. This actually gives you a good scenario where you can actually see how I got there again. I went under relationships and modeling, and then I selected synonyms. And then I chose the table, and you can see it looks like the synonyms are still here. So all I really need to do is just publish this out. So I'm going to hit publish. I'm already signed in, so it doesn't have to freeze on me again. And I'm going to publish this out to where it says pass session, and I'll hit select. I'm going to replace the Power BI desktop file I already have on the service, and it's going to publish this off to the Power BI service now. And once it does, I can go back over to Power BI, and I should be able to ask this question again. Remember what my question was? It didn't work a moment ago. It was total units by device, and you'll notice now it does work. I can actually type total units by device, or guess what? I can also type total units by Saturday Night SQL, and look, that also works. We made that as a synonym for product category. And so because we made that as a synonym here, we're easily able to ask multiple ways or multiple versions of a question and it still be able to bring back that data pretty clearly here. So really interesting way that we can kind of work through this here inside the Power BI desktop and the Power BI service. All right, let's go on to our next example here. The next thing I want to show you guys, and I know we're really running out of time now, so I'm going to kind of pick a couple ones here that we might want to show. The next thing I want to show you guys is around data visualizations, okay? And I have quite a few different examples that we can show. I know we're running out of time, and I want to save some time for questions. So I'm going to pick, let's say, 2 of them here, and I know we'll even have kind of limited time to show 2 of them, but one of them is pretty quick. So the 2 examples I'm going to show are the top 2 here, the non-measure values as tooltips, and also I'll show you an example of a custom visual because I want to highlight something in there that's pretty interesting. The R visual gallery, I'll show you here, there's actually an R scripting gallery or a showcase that you can go to. And if you go to that R script showcase, what you'll find is there's a bunch of R scripts that have kind of been written ahead of time for you. And you can use those R scripts to be able to create your own visuals. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about that if we have some extra time or if you guys have some questions on that. All right, so the things that I want to show you here. Number 1 is an example of working with tooltips. Okay, so I have this example here of a basic column chart, okay? And you'll notice that in column charts, you do have tooltips. Whenever you hover above a column, you'll see a tooltip pops up. In this case, the tooltip shows me the name of the country and the sales amount. But what's nice about these tooltips that you have inside of the Power BI visuals is you have the ability to add new items to that tooltip. Say, for example, I wanted to add something like the order quantity to the tooltip section. I added a new value here to the tooltip, and you can now see there's a new item shows up underneath the tooltip. I see order quantity. It's not formatted, but I can see there was 21,344 order quantity sold. That's pretty nice. The downside of how these tooltips work is whenever you want to put text in the tooltip, it doesn't interact here very nicely. So say, for example, I want to see a list of all of the regions that were underneath that country. I might want to do something like drag in the sales territory region in as a tooltip. And so if I were to drag in the sales territory region as a tooltip, I would see that it only shows one region. So it's showing the central region here because it's actually showing the first region that it found on the list. You'll notice there it's using a function there called first. Well, I happen to know there's multiple regions underneath the United States. And so what I'd like to do is I want to create a DAX expression that actually handles this, and a DAX expression that will show me all of the regions underneath the example that we're looking at here. Okay? in this case, the country of the United States. So I've already pre-written a little bit of code, and to give you a hint on where I got this, this actually isn't something I created. I got this from one of my buddies his name is Dustin Ryan, and you can find his blog if you go to SQLDusty.com. He has a couple really great blogs, a set of blogs on Power BI tips. And one of the tips that he gives is how you can actually leverage writing a little bit of a DAX statement here. And I'm going to show you two different ways to do this. By writing a short DAX statement, you can return back all of the regions, in this case, that would appear underneath the United States. And so what I'll do here is I'll create a quick little new calculated measure. And I'm going to paste this in. We don't have a ton of time to talk about the code, so let me just show you kind of the end result here. And basically the idea of what we're doing here is we're creating a new measure that we can apply to the tooltip. And whenever I look at the tooltip, notice what happens now. It doesn't just show the first region that I happen to pull in, and by the way, it pulled in that central region because of the sorted it alphabetically. But now it pulls in all of the regions that are underneath the United States with this small little DAX statement. Okay, so it's using a little concatenated X function along with a calculate function to be able to concatenate all of the region values together. Now, one downside of the way this function is written is that, in this case, I only have 5 regions underneath here. But what if I had 25 regions under here? Well, in that case, it gets a little excessive. The list gets a little bit better. And so what Dustin's blog shows is another example here. It's a little bit of a longer statement here. But what his statement does here in this case, what his DAX expression does, is it'll actually look at the number of values that it has, and instead of concatenating all the values together, it'll see whenever you have 3 or more values, or more than 3 values, it'll put the text of and more here. So you can see it's northwest, northeast, central, and it says and more, just because there's too many regions that really should be filling into a tooltip here. So if you want to see them more, you can do like a drill down and actually see a more granular view of the data. So it's an interesting way to kind of leverage tooltips here. All right, we're kind of out of time here as far as new stuff. The one last thing that I'll show you here, and I'll do this as quickly as possible because I do want to save time for questions, and I want to respect that for Debbie and Sarah here. They run this group. I want to show some of the custom visual capabilities here, and I'll do this very quickly. You can find custom visuals if you go to the custom visual gallery inside of the Power BI website. The Power BI website, if you go to visuals.powerbi.com, that's probably the easiest way to find it. So if you go to visuals.powerbi.com, this URL right
Hey, Devin. Looks like he probably he's hockey again. Let us give him a few minutes. I'll shout to him again.
Hey, Devin, we cannot hear you.
He probably he's hockey again. Hey, Devin, can you hear me? Can't hear you.
You guys can hear me again?
Yes, yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I must have done it again. So we're kind of running out of time there anyways. Would you guys like me to go ahead and go into questions now or show any more?
Wait, Devin, do you mind to finish this part and then we can go to the questions? If we have too many questions, maybe what I'll do, I'll just collect them all and email you.
Sure,
those,
sure.
Those you didn't have time to answer, then maybe you can post it on your blog or something. Or
Yeah,
maybe
that sounds great.
Back.
That sounds
Okay.
great. Yeah, I appreciate you guys hanging out with me. There's a nice amount of folks in here, so I want to make sure we get you able to see as much as we can. So Where I left off here is I talked about the custom visual gallery, and then I made a mistake of hitting a bad button here. But I need to adjust those hotkeys on here. But the custom visual gallery is really neat. There's more than 60 different visuals that you can download and add to Power BI. So if you're ever thinking, oh man, there's just not many visuals available inside of Power BI, there's a lot more that you can go download that Microsoft and other community developers have built out. So if you go to visuals.powerbi.com, which is what you'll see up in my URL here that I tried to zoom in on earlier, that's where you can find all these custom visuals. And so one of the newer ones that I want to show you guys is the infographic. This is a really cool one. You actually saw it a little bit earlier with one of the examples I was showing. You saw kind of an infographic example, but I want to show you how you can use this infographic designer. It's really cool. And this will be our last example for the night. So I have this infographic designer right here. This is my example. I have a blank sheet here. So basically what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how you can use this infographic designer. And if you want to go find it and use it yourself, you can go to that visual gallery that we have here, and you can select the infographic designer and download the visual to play around with it yourself. And you can download the sample as well. This one's developed by Microsoft. So what I'm going to do in this example is we're going to go use the infographic designer, which I have as a visual right here. And I'll make this a little larger. And we're going to be looking at wine consumption. So if you're a big wine fan, if you like drinking wine, this is all about wine consumption here by different regions. And so what I'm going to do is add to this infographic some data that I have around wine consumption. And I'm going to add in the region as well as the amount of consumption right here. And you can see it starts us off with kind of a basic column chart. Now, if you want to actually apply an infographic to this, you'll see there's a little pencil icon right here, and it's called an edit mark. And if you use that edit mark, that will allow you to start to turn this into a true infographic. So if I click edit mark here, I can do things like change the visual to, instead of using a column chart, I can tell it that I actually want to use something like a different shape. So maybe if we're talking about drinking wine, I might want to make this into a wine glass or a wine bottle like this one here. And you can see when you select that, it actually converts the column chart into wine bottles. You can also do things like changing the fill. So you'll see there's a fill percentage right now that's set to none. I can change that to, instead of none, to be based off the consumption. And so you can kind of see that a percentage of the wine bottle is actually being shown based on the consumption that we have in our data. Now, if you're going to change the fill percentage, you also need to go and change the layout as well. So if I were to go underneath the layout section here, underneath the layout section, there's an option here where you can change the bound to option. Instead of being bound to inner, if you change it to outer, check out what happens as soon as I click outer. It makes this more of a full chart, in that fill percentage that we're showing here is actually more useful. You can also do some other things here underneath the layout section. You might want to insert multiple, maybe some text in here. So say, for example, I wanted to put a data label next to this to actually show me the value that we have. I could do something like that. I can tell it that I want to insert some text right here. And you'll see that it has a little text box that's added on next to each one of my wine bottles. And what I can do underneath that is I can change it, instead of just being plain text, maybe I want to actually bind that text that you see here to some data. And so there's an option here where you can make this data binding. So I can hit data binding off and actually turn on data binding and say that I want to bind the data marks that you see here, the text box you see here, to consumption. And notice what happens as soon as I hit apply. It's actually going to change those to be values here. So I can see that I'm kind of adding labels to my infographic. Now if I go back, I can do some other additional changes here. I can actually go underneath the layout section again. And then underneath the layout section, I can choose whether I'm identifying the text box or the wine bottle, and you can kind of change around how this is being shown. So maybe I want to, for example, I want to make it so that I can actually see the text a little larger. I can increase this to 16-point font if I wanted to. I can also do something like go underneath the layout section, and I can change it so that I can actually see the values a little bit better. So I can change this to be something like give me 30 points or 30 pixels here, and you can actually change it on the other side here as well. And you can kind of adjust how this is visualized. So if I kind of play around here, I can really kind of see the data a little bit better. And it's all about kind of how you picture it in here. So you can really adjust some of these things. You can change it here. Let's say, for example, I want to actually adjust the shape here for the wine bottle itself. I can change this to 30 points, like so. And then just kind of moving around and shifting around things inside of the visualization. So you can really play around with this quite a bit. So that's one example of a infographic. Another way that we can do this as well, let me make this a little smaller here, and I'll insert one more infographic. You can also have multiples in here. So let me show you another variation of how you can play around with the infographic. We did this one more as kind of a column chart. You can also make this as more of a bar chart. And so you can change and kind of toggle back and forth on a bar and a column chart by going underneath the Format Paintbrush here. So you'll see over here there's a Format Paintbrush option right here. And you can go under the chart option. You can toggle back and forth between whether or not you're using this as a column or a bar chart. So if I select this as a bar chart this time, you'll notice that it converts it to a bar chart. And then we can go back to that little pencil icon here, and we can really kind of play around with this quite a bit more. So let's actually full screen that. And let's tell it that I want to make this into wine bottles again, like we did last time. Okay. And you'll notice what it does whenever it's a bar chart is it just makes them really wide. Well, that's not really what I want to do. What I want to do is I want to see a wine bottle, multiple wine bottles here as a way of indicating the bar chart. So what I can do is I can turn on this option here called multiple units right here. If I turn that option on, what it'll do is it'll actually just multiply the icon that we're using over and over to represent the bar chart. And then if we wanted to see these different regions as different colors, you'll see there's an option here to actually make the color data binding as well. You can either just simply change the color here to a certain color if you wanted to, and that'll actually make all the colors the same. I made a white. That wasn't a good choice. Or you can choose this little link item here, and you can make it data binding. So if I click on data binding, I can bind it to my region, and you can have certain colors for each of the regions. And if I hit apply on this, you'll see that it actually gives me an icon, or I should say a new color for each of the regions that I have. By the way, these things work together, so I can actually have cross-filtering apply where I select one of the wine bottles up top and it filters the ones on the bottom, or I can multi-select the ones on the top and it'll filter the ones on the bottom. So they can interact with each other just like any visuals that you have inside of Power BI. All right, well, I think that's all the time I have for new stuff. I went a bit over there, but let me put my contact information up here in case you'd like to reach out later. And then I'll open up the chat here to see any questions. Do you guys have any questions kind of queued up here, or do you want me to just kind of go down the list and read through them?
Maybe you can go through the list and see.
Sure. Yeah, so I see the first one here. It says, please recommend a book on R language and M language. So there's quite a few books out there for R. I actually haven't yet to purchase one. There's quite a few that you'd be able to find. But one, I definitely know there's not many M language books out there, but there is one called M is for Data Monkeys, I believe it's called, and it's by Ken Pools and I can't remember the other individual's name. I think it's Miguel. But there's that's a great book that I'd recommend. I've glanced through that one, and it's pretty good if you're trying to pick up how to learn the M query language. The R language is an open source language, but there's a lot of stuff out there for that as well. You'll be able to find a lot of material there if you take a look. Next question I have here is how do you get Power BI service to do some auto analysis on your model? So Tomas asked this question. So he's asking about kind of an option that's called giving you insights is basically what it's called. So what he'd like to see is from a Power BI model if it can automatically create some insights for you. And it can. And so what I'm looking at, this is the Power BI service. And if I wanted it to automatically create some analysis for me, you can do that by going over to your data sets. And if you select your data sets, you'll see there's an option in here to do quick insights. The option here called quick insights actually does some automatic analysis for you. And so if you select this quick insights option, you'll notice up in the top right that it now says that it's searching for insights. And what it'll do as soon as it's done doing that is it gives you an option there to select and see some of the automatic analysis that it's done for you. Sometimes that analysis is actually helpful, and sometimes that analysis is not helpful at all. Because basically what it's doing is it's looking at your data model and it's making its best guess on what's interesting to you. And it's not always right. Sometimes it's wrong whenever it does that automatic analysis. And so I'll kind of let this run here as I go to the next question, and we'll click on it whenever it's kind of done doing that analysis. So Tomas, that's to your question here. Let's see, next question. The past week, Microsoft just announced that SSRS technical preview was available, but it seems that it still cannot publish a Power BI report using the Power BI desktop to on-premises SSRS. We can only upload a Power BI workbook file to SSRS and then click on the file and open it inside of the Power BI local Power BI desktop in order to see a report. Is that true with the SSRS technical previews? This is by Holly. Holly, to be honest, I haven't had a chance to test out the new technical preview. I know you are absolutely right. The current SQL 2016 install, if you want to be able to get a Power BI file and reporting services, you're right. There's not a deploy option. You actually have to upload it. So as far as speaking to the technical preview, I haven't had a chance to install it myself to test that out to see if that's changed at all. But I know that's a goal, is to make it very seamless to be able to go from the desktop to Power BI. Power BI for reporting services. So I'm excited to see if that's actually been changed at all, but I can't speak to that myself. Next question here is how many of the maximum number of rows and columns of tables can be opened inside the Power BI, the editor by Power BI? So this is a good question. And the answer to the question is it depends. So this has to do with how much data can I basically get into Power BI, and it really depends on the resources of your machine. How Power BI works, at least by default, whenever you go to import data, is it brings it into a data model. And that data model is an in-memory technology. It's actually using the in-memory, the memory engine of your laptop or desktop to be able to import data. So if you don't really have a whole lot of RAM on your machine, then that really limits the amount of data that you can bring in. Also, if you're working on like a 32-bit operating system, then that'll also limit the data that you can bring in, because the 32-bit operating system will limit the amount of RAM that your Power BI desktop can use. So there's some limitations there that really have to do with your machine itself. You're limited to the amount of data you can bring in based on the resources that your laptop or desktop has. Now, there's an exception to that. If you're using options like direct query or live connection, direct query will actually connect to the original data source, and when it connects to that data source, it's pulling in live data. So you're not really limited to the amount of data that you can bring in, because it's looking at the live version of the data on the server. So it's actually pointing to the server. Instead of importing data into the Power BI desktop, it's pointing to the server and bringing in data that way. And so because of that, you're not limited to the amount of data, but you do see some performance degradation because you're pulling in data live. Let's see, this feature is still in preview, like 10 million rows. I'm not sure what that's in reference to that Eric said. If you've got Pro account, if it takes an hour to upload 1 million rows in the Power BI service. That's more just a comment. Can Power BI use stored procedures? Can it use parameters in stored procedures like SSRS? Okay, so kind of two-part question there. This is an interesting one. So the downside of one, yes, you can use stored procedures. So let me start with the first part of the question. Yes, you can use stored procedures inside of Power BI. And the way you would do that is as you go to do a data import from your data source. So I would go and say I want to connect to SQL Server. And when I go to connect to SQL Server, you'll see there's an option down here at the bottom where I can actually connect to my stored procedure. The downside of this is it doesn't really work like you're suggesting. So you're kind of suggesting, can I have reporting services parameters or reporting services parameters that interact with a stored procedure that I might execute down here? The short answer to that is no, not like reporting services, but the longer, more in-depth answer is there are parameters that you can do. They just don't quite work like you would experience inside of reporting services. So there are parameters inside of Power BI, but they're more parameters like you would think of in SSIS. So if you've worked with SSIS before and you've done parameters there, you know that you have parameters inside of SSIS that actually allow you to limit what data gets imported. But this again is limiting the data that's being imported into your model. It's not necessarily just displaying the data differently. So if you think about reporting services, it'll display the data and you can kind of have an interactive parameter that the users can interact with. You don't really have that kind of interactive parameter inside of Power BI yet. What you do have is the ability to apply a filter filter parameter on your data set or even your data source, like database name, and that's built into the query editor. The query editor itself actually has an option up here on the top called Manage Parameters. It's a little bit different than reporting services. I'd recommend taking a look at my blog where I've shown some examples of how that works. All right. Next question, do you suggest any books or online resources for Power BI? Yeah, so this is an interesting question. You'll find there's quite a few books available. The problem with buying books around Power BI, or really any cloud service for that matter, is it changes too frequently. So if you were to go out and buy a Power BI book right now, and if it wasn't a digital copy, if you went out and got a print copy that doesn't get updated very often, then you're probably getting something that's very out of date. And so while there are Power BI books out there, frankly, and they're written by some really nice people, and I respect them, I wouldn't necessarily buy any Power BI books. But as far as other resources, I will plug myself a little bit there. I actually have a Power BI class that we keep up to date very well. So if you're interested, you can go to pragmaticworks.com and check that out. I won't talk a whole bunch about that, but I would suggest taking a look at that. I also have at pragmaticworks.com, we do some free webinars as well. And you can actually see our free content if you go to our website as well. Let's see, how does Power BI compare to Tableau in terms of performance? Can Power BI export visuals to Excel? So great question. So in terms of performance, I have actually used Tableau a little bit, and Power BI is going to outperform Tableau, and here's why. When it comes to performance. When it comes to performance, Tableau has just made some purchases recently, and they've announced these in the last couple months, that they're trying to implement their own in-memory technology like Power BI has. So Power BI has the in-memory technology built into it through the data modeling process that you do. So anytime you go to import something into Power BI, by default, it gets placed into a data model. And that's, if you've used a lot of Excel Power BI in the past, that's basically Power Pivot inside of the Power BI desktop. Well, Tableau doesn't really have that. So what some people would experience would be a performance degradation in Tableau because it's connecting to the data source and it's having to kind of churn through and write queries to pull back from the data source. Unfortunately, though, it didn't have any kind of data modeling engine that allowed it to, at least not like Power BI has, to be able to bring that data in memory. Now, Tableau is making some changes there. They've actually made some recent purchases to be able to handle that and also to do some data transformation like Power BI has. They've made some purchases there as well. Those features haven't been implemented yet, but they're coming to Tableau. So Tableau is trying to catch up on that side of the world here. Can Power BI export visuals to Excel? No, you can't really export visuals, but there are Power BI capabilities. They're kind of Power BI for Excel, like Power View, where you can create your own visuals inside of Excel. Now, what you can do to Excel, this is kind of an interesting feature. What you can do to Excel is you can actually connect to a Power BI data set in Excel. And so what I mean by that is if I were to go show you this data set that I have here called Synonyms example, you'll notice that if I hit the ellipses next to it that there's an option here called Analyze in Excel. And basically what that'll do is it'll create a connection to this data set in Excel, and I can start building my own Excel visuals on top of this data set like pivot tables or pivot charts or really anything else I want to do inside of Excel. And all you have to do is click Analyze in Excel. There is a plugin you have to have downloaded, which I believe I already have downloaded. Well, it's prompting me to download it. But you download this plugin, and basically it allows you to connect into your Power BI data connectors or data sets, and then you can use that inside of Excel to connect into your data sets that you have saved on the Power BI service. I'm going to install that real quickly. I'll show that as I get to the next question here. What is the data gateway for Power BI? So this question was by Amanda. So the data gateway is what you'll use to be able to connect your on-premises data that you have. So think about your SQL server that you have installed on your local server farm, anything that you don't have in the cloud, basically. So anything you don't have in the cloud that you want to connect to the Power BI service, you'll use the data gateway to be able to do that. All right, so let me show you what that is here. I'll go show you where the data gateway is. Let me minimize this for a moment. The data gateway you'll find if you click on inside the Power BI, you'll click on this little settings icon here, and you'll see there's an option to manage gateways. You'll also find that before you can get to managing gateways, you need to download the data gateway. And that's under the download section here. So underneath the download section, you'll see there's a data gateway option. And what this data gateway will allow you to do is you will install the data gateway on your machine or on your server. And then that'll allow you to connect your on-premises data sources to your Power BI service. And that allows you to do things like doing automatic data refreshes. It also allows you to do things like live data connections. If I have a live data connection from like analysis services or a direct query connection to SQL Server, I can use the data gateway to be able to connect that live data into Power BI. So that's kind of the goal with the data gateway, is to connect your on-premises data to the cloud. And so by the way, I got my connection into Power BI here. If I launch open this, it's going to launch open Excel that has a live connection, or not a live connection, but it has a connection into Power BI. And then I would sign in here. It looked like it prompted me to sign in, but it went away. If I sign into here, let me make sure I type that right. If I signed in, you'll see it'll launch open this as basically like a pivot table where I can start to bring in data and build a pivot table on top of it. So I can see something like, let me show the regions and the consumption by regions here, and I can do something like places under the VAT. Well, that's brought in here to the bad data type. But I can actually kind of analyze the data here if I wanted to in an Excel format. So if you prefer Excel, you can certainly kind of bring the data in this manner as well. So that's analyzed in Excel. It was kind of a sidebar question there. All right, next question I have. Can you present more in the future? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I enjoyed presenting for you guys. I'd love to present again. I'm sorry I had a couple mishaps on my side there where I hit some hotkeys to put my machine to sleep, but I'd love to present for you guys again. Next question. So with R, you never have the library loaded in the Power BI. You always need to load the library to R first before you run the script with Power BI. Is that correct? This is from Thomas G. Yeah, so Thomas, you're right. Generally speaking, whenever you are using the R language, whether it be for creating R visuals or whether it be for using R scripts for transforms, you're going to need to go into the R client first and load the library here first, or install the package here first. There is one exception to this where you don't have to do that step first. The exception to that rule is if you ever use any of the custom visuals. You'll notice in the custom visual gallery that I showed earlier that there's two different types of custom visuals. You have the custom visuals that someone kind of built out this is the list of 60 plus odd visuals I talked about earlier. But then you'll also notice there's this R-powered visuals. And the R-powered visuals are ones that have been created by developers, and I think some of these are by Microsoft as well, that you can download, and it doesn't require you to actually write the R yourself, but it does use R behind the scenes. So these R-powered visuals, if you download one of them, it allows you to import them as basically a custom visual that uses R behind the scenes, and it will automatically install the libraries for you. So rather than you having to open up the R client and install the libraries, these visuals that you see here will install the libraries for you automatically. Outside of this one section here, you're going to have to go to the R client and install them yourself first, unfortunately. So yeah, you're right, generally speaking, Thomas, but here's the one exception to that. Can Power BI reports refresh weekly automatically after they were published on PowerBI.com? So that's from Amanda. So talking about refreshing the data, they can. Yeah, you actually have the capability to tell it what frequency you want to update the data. And the way that you schedule a refresh, I'm not sure if I'll be able to go through all the steps of that right now, but the way that you schedule a data refresh is you go find your data set. So I have my data sets over here on the left-hand side. And I would tell it, you'd hit the ellipses next to the data set right here, and you can schedule a refresh here. And to schedule a refresh, you will likely need to have that data gateway that we talked about earlier configured. So for example, if I'm trying to refresh data from SQL Server into Power BI, then I would need to create a data gateway or install a data gateway on my SQL Server or on my server that has SQL Server on it. And then I can come in here and schedule a refresh. And then it'll walk me through actually configuring that. And then I can also actually tell it whether I want this refresh. And you can see it's off right now. But I can tell it here whether I want it to be daily, weekly, or whatever I want the timing to be. And I can configure that here inside of the dataset configuration. Well, there's a couple of the questions that got asked via email earlier, and I remember a few of them. One of the questions that we had earlier was around downloading Power BI desktop files from the Power BI service. So a newer feature that was released, gosh, it might be like maybe 2 months ago, was the capability to actually download once you publish a report. So once I publish a report to the Power BI service, the question is there a way to download it back to my machine? So say, for example, it wasn't one that I created, but it was one that someone else created, and I now want to be able to download it locally to my machine. Is there a way to download it from the Power BI service? And there is. The way you can do that is by going to the report. So I'm looking at a report here that I have, and I can download it by hitting the File menu, and there's an option here called Download Report. Now this feature is still in preview. You can see it says Preview next to it, but I could download this as a PBIX file. That's the file extension for Power BI Desktop, and then I can use that inside of on my own workstation, even though I downloaded it from the service. Now I will warn you here, this feature only works on fairly new models that have been published to the Power BI service. So if you haven't published to the Power BI service in the last 2 months or so, then you might not even see this option, or it might be grayed out just because the feature's so new. You haven't deployed since the feature's been released. And so there's some new capabilities that are implemented as you publish in newer Power BI services. Another question that I saw that was sent earlier was around saving Q&A questions. Remember we talked about Q&A earlier, and I showed you how this worked. I showed you how you can come in here and ask questions. So I can ask a question like this, and I can say, show me the total units by device. Okay, remember we showed you Q&A earlier, and someone's asked the question via email before the session about how do I print this, or how do I save this as a PDF? And I did a little research. There is a way to do it. It's kind of a little bit of a hack. But basically what you could do is you can pin this visual to your dashboard. There's a pin option up in the top right, and I can pin this visual, and I'll pin it to my dashboard. And then I can see it appears in my dashboard right here now. And one of the neat things that you can do here to be able to save this as a PDF, and then again, this is a little bit of a hack to solve that question that somebody had, but you can come up here to where you see the ellipses. Remember I told you if you want to find something to do, just go up to the ellipses and that'll probably solve your problem. If I go up to the ellipses here, you'll see there's an option where I can print the dashboard. And if I select Print Dashboard, I can tell it that I actually want to print, do Microsoft Print to PDF, and then I can have this saved as a PDF version of that visual. And so I can have this whole it actually does the entire dashboard, but I can have that entire dashboard saved as a PDF, and it will show me the visual down here in the bottom. The one that we created via Q&A can be saved from the dashboard itself. So that was a question we got via email as well. I think we got another question popped in here. Really good session. Will Power BI replace SSRS, or can Power BI implement all functionality, all functions provided by SSRS? So that's from Amanda as well. So short answer, Amanda, just because I know we're running out of time here, short answer is no. I don't think SSRS is going away. In fact, you'll still see SSRS used a lot for things like more operational reporting. And when I say operational reporting, I think of that as more detail reporting, where you have a bunch of line item type data where you're displaying on a report. Reporting services is still going to continue to be the answer for more line item reporting capabilities, or more operational reporting. Think of Power BI more for dashboards. You, of course, can create tables and matrices inside of Power BI, but it's not really ideal for those scenarios. So it's not ideal to just have a list of data in Power BI. If you want to show a list of data, reporting services is going to continue to be the better tool for that job. You also might find reporting services better when it comes to things like subscriptions or report delivery. Now, Power BI actually just released a new feature this week, and I'm going to show briefly. I'm not going to dig too deep into it because we're out of time now. But there's a new feature in Power BI that was released this week called Subscribe right here. And you can subscribe to individual reports. Unfortunately, this feature is pretty limited. It's still new. But basically what Subscribe allows you to do is probably similar to a feature that you're familiar to in reporting services called subscriptions. And when you hit Subscribe here, what it allows you to do is actually subscribe to a report. So I can tell it which of the reports on the report that we're looking at here, so I have multiple report pages, which one of these do I want to subscribe to, so I can hit any one of them, and then hit Save and Close. And if I had data refresh configured on this, then I could actually tell it whether I wanted to subscribe to it daily or weekly. and then it would allow me to have a image. It actually saves it as an image and emails it to you directly to you. Now, this subscription feature here is pretty weak right now compared to the reporting services subscription capabilities. What you have in reporting services is much more sophisticated than what you can do here, at least right now. It's a brand new feature. But what you can do here inside of Power BI is you can subscribe either daily or weekly, but it'll only give it to you. It'll only give you and deliver a report to you once a day. It'll never deliver a report to you more than 24 hours, more than within a 24-hour time span. It'll also only deliver reports to you that have data refresh configured properly. So I shouldn't say that. It'll only deliver reports to you whenever a data refresh is initiated. So that's something to also keep in mind. Can we show Power BI reports on a wall TV in our company? I tried to use the URL link with credentials embedded in the link, but it doesn't work somehow. Great question. So being able to put it on a TV, absolutely. I actually do that in my office now. Let me show you how to do that. So if I wanted to put this on a TV, here's how I would do it. I would go over to my dashboard, and you can see right here is the dashboard's kind of gotten started. There's not much to this dashboard, but I would go up to the ellipses here, and you'll see there is an option here called, let's see, where did it go? There was a feature in here. I wonder if they moved it. There was a feature in here basically that would do that for you, where you could click one button and it would kind of full screen. Oh, here it is right here. It's called Enter Full Screen Mode. And if I select Enter Full Screen Mode, here's what it does. It kind of sets it up here for you so you can visualize this, or you can see it in full screen on a TV. And so you don't really know that Power BI is behind the scenes here. You do have to kind of log into Power BI to use this, but it's kind of a nice way to be able to see it on a TV. All right, next question here. How about saving what people asked? For example, how many people wanted the total sales units? So basically, Greg's asking a question here around saving what people asked for in Q&A. So when somebody asks a question in the dashboard, does it save those results? It does to some extent. So it does save some of them. You can actually see it down here, for example. So you can see that it's saving some of these synonyms for us, or it's saving some of these inquiries or these questions that we've asked in the past. But there actually used to be an additional feature in the old version, the first release of Power BI, that did that capability for you. And there was actually a whole auditing framework around all the questions that people were asking, so you could kind of fine tune it a little bit. And it also used to have, and again, this is the old kind of V1 of Power BI, so I'm hoping some of these features come back. There was also a feature in Q&A capabilities called phrasing. So I showed you synonyms today, and synonyms have been around for a while, but there was an older feature called phrasing that you would do in addition to synonyms. And basically, here's how phrasing would work, and I'm hoping this feature comes back. It's not here yet. But phrasing would work this way. It would allow you to create phrases for how people talk about the data. All right, so think about it like this. We just had a presidential election, right? And you might ask questions about your presidential election data. Let's say you had a data set that had presidential election information. And so you might ask it something like this. You might ask, who won the election? That's a question you might ask of the data. Who won the election? Well, if you were to ask Power BI who won the election, it doesn't understand what it means to win something. You know, that's a term that we use, but really when you're asking that information about the data, to win something has to be relative to the data. So to win an election means that you would have to create a phrase that was indicating someone winning an election, and for someone to win an election, they needed to get 535 electoral votes. A certain, not 500, 270 electoral votes means winning an election. And so you would actually, in the past, create phrases that would enhance the Q&A capabilities. And so that's something that I'm hoping is going to come back. It's just not here yet. Does Power BI have top-in analysis built in? It certainly does now. That's a newer feature that's in here as well. So this new feature that you have in Power BI allows you to actually do what you've suggested. So say, for example, I want to see top-in capability. So I'm looking at a Power BI quick report here. What I can do is I can select a visual, and if I go over to the values section here and do quick calc, so what you're suggesting is underneath this quick calc capabilities. If I select quick calc, you'll notice here that it pops open a new dialog here for me. And underneath this new dialog, let's hope that it's here, it should be here, I can tell it that I want to show this value as, it's only doing percentage of total here. I think I need to actually have this as a different type of aggregate. There is that capability to do top N. It's just not showing here for some reason. Let me see what I'm missing. Let me try and create a new table here. It is a newer feature, so it's possible I am just not showing it for some reason. So let me do something like, maybe I want to see top cities. And so I would do something like a quick calc here. I'm not seeing it, but I believe maybe it's a feature that's coming. Maybe it's something that I saw on the roadmap that's just not here yet. I know that feature I thought was already here, but it could just be on the roadmap to come soon, because it's supposed to be underneath this quick calc section, if I remember right. All right, next question I have here is, can we use Cortana to talk with Power BI Q&A? Yes, this is a question from Amanda. You certainly can. I don't currently have it configured to do that, but you can configure Cortana, and basically you would ask a question from this section. I don't have it configured to do this currently, but you can configure it to actually interact with Q&A, just like you suggested. And so as you ask a question within your Windows 10 device, you can, it'll immediately connect into, as long as you're signed into your Power BI account, it'll be able to return back data and actually show you visualizations within inside of Windows 10 interacting with Cortana. So there are some neat capabilities that have been added in pretty recently. One other feature here that oftentimes people ask for that's fairly new as well is you have the ability now to do things like include or exclude values. This is a new feature. So say, for example, I wanted to include just a couple of these cities. You can actually highlight a couple of these values here, right-click, and you can tell it that you want to group these values together, or maybe you want to exclude these values. So you have some capabilities of some new features in some of the visuals to include, exclude, or even put these into different groups if you wanted to. So check this out. You can do like a group, and it'll actually group these items together. And what I can do now is I've created a new group that visualizes the items that I selected and then everything else. That's a new feature as well to Power BI a couple months back. I think we got another question here. Inside each individual statistic, but I'm not sure what that one's asking. Inside each individual stat, but web Power BI. I'm not sure what that was asking. SSRS can be integrated into applications. Do Power BI have the same functionality? So this is from Holly Z. Yeah, Holly, you can integrate into your applications. So there's something called Power BI Embed. And what Power BI Embed does is it allows you to, as the name implies, it allows you to embed Power BI visuals and reports into your application. So if you have an application that you've developed, you can use this feature called Power BI Embed, and it allows you to basically integrate it into your application that you develop. So there's a couple open source projects out there that you can actually see now on how to do that. I will note this, just so you're aware of it. Remember that Power BI is all Azure-based, so whenever you go to deploy it, it's using the cloud service Azure to be able to visualize that data, or really to store that data. So it does actually bill you by the number of sessions that people use. The number of sessions that people have inside of your report, even if it's embedded in your application, is how they charge you for that. So that's something to be aware of. Oh, someone help me out here. So clicking the ellipses in the top right corner of a graph can, thank you, whoever helped me out with that. So let me see how I can do that here. Let me take a step back. So someone helped me out here a little bit by telling me how to do the top N. Thank you very much for doing that. They said hit the ellipses up here. And I'm not seeing it, unless I'm going to the wrong place. I believe you're right. It's probably here somewhere because I think I've already seen it, but maybe I'm just missing it here. No problem. All right, so we'll take, maybe this will be our last question here. I have to roll myself. The ML, so I think that's machine learning. The ML used to do the quick insights in the cloud. Maybe the question is, is ML used for quick insights here in the cloud? I don't know if it's necessarily ML that does the quick insights. Let me see if that one if it ever brought back my quick insights. It was taking forever when we were doing it earlier. Let's see if it ever actually brought it back. So I have this example here where I told it to do. It's still getting insights, so it's taking its time doing that. I don't know. So it's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Question being, does it use ML, Microsoft Machine Learning, to do that? I'm not sure what it's using behind the scenes to do that. That's a great question.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Hey, George, yeah, you can go ahead now.
Yeah, sorry. I was in a Power BI class today, and inside each of the insights on the side, but this is only in the cloud, you can do you can do scoping insights on the quick insights, but the insight is only on the cloud products. It's not on the desktop products. I just wanted to mention that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Great point. Great. Any other questions you guys have, Debbie or Sarah, to kind of wrap up?
No.
You got a chance to look at the question I sent under 5 of them? I sent you.
Yeah, I answered a couple of them just a few moments ago. Let me pull
Yeah.
that up. I'll pause my screen so you guys don't see email.
I can read it out. The first one is how to schedule a fresh report by other users. The comment is, it seems only the original report developer has the option to schedule refresh. Other users, even admin role, have not such as an option. We would grant the admin all options as the original creator in datasets view. Otherwise, the report will be useless if the original creator left the company and nobody can refresh the data.
Yeah, so this is a great question. So I was under the impression, I thought that if you made someone else an admin, they could do that. So it sounds like they maybe have actually walked through that experience and it didn't seem to be the case. I thought my last experience where I had multiple admins, so what I did is I created a workspace. And once I created that workspace, I could assign other individuals as admin, and they can kind of contribute. I can contribute, and then we can both be administrators of the data set and schedule refreshes. So that was the experience I had. But it sounds like they're having a different experience. So that maybe whoever that was, I can kind of have a follow up with. Question 2, I think I showed that earlier. Question 2, just as a reminder, whoever asked that one. Yep. So that one was. If you want to download from the Power BI service, you just go up to the File menu here, and you select Download Report. So that one you can do now. It's a fairly new feature. Let's go back here. How do you export into Excel or PDF file from the natural language generating dashboard? So I showed that one briefly. That was the option I showed you where you can actually do a quick print. So if you do print to PDF, there is no option so far to be able to plug it into Excel, but you can save it to a PDF by doing that print to PDF option that I showed earlier. So that's kind of one workaround to be able to get that from Q&A. And then the last one here is how, I guess there's a fifth one there too, how to set a default dashboard to power users. So after creating several dashboards, okay, so I got you here. So you have several dashboards created basically, and you want to be able to set one as the default. So there's not a capability to set a default, but what there is the capability of, if I go back over here, is you can set favorites. So this is kind of your compromise here to be able to make this work. So if you have multiple dashboards, so let's say let's create multiple dashboards here. I'll create dashboard 1, create dashboard 2 here. All right, so I have multiple dashboards that I've now created. What you can do if you want to set one as more of a default, you can turn on favorites, which you see up here. I have a favorite section, and if I turn one on as a favorite, here's how it shows. Let me make the infographic one here as my favorite. You select the dashboard, and then you come up to the top here where you see the option called favorite, and you basically select that. And if I select favorite, it now appears underneath the favorite section. And what that does, the reason why that's important is because there's actually a change coming to the Power BI service. I'm not sure how many of you guys have actually looked at the preview of what's coming to some of the new features of the Power BI service. If you ever want to test out what's in preview, there's a way to do that. And what they're doing with this new preview capability is they're basically making the favorites almost like default dashboards. And so what I mean by that is here's what the preview looks like. Here's how to turn on the preview, by the way, as well. If you go to the settings option here and select settings again, you'll notice there's preview features right here underneath settings. And so I can turn on preview features, and if I do that, it gives me early access to some of the previews. And you notice when I hit apply here, it's going to change the way this works over here on the right-hand side. And what happens now is it only shows me, by default, it'll only show me my favorite dashboards usually kind of prioritized. So as soon as I go to log into this workspace, it prioritizes the favorites first. That's the first thing you're going to see whenever you log in. So that's kind of might be a workaround. I think there's some features coming very soon. That preview feature will kind of give you some insight into what's happening there. All right. All right. So then, there was one other question, I believe. Let's see, the last question we had here was, is it SSIS related? Okay. Yeah, I did some quick search. This looked like it had to do with a script component or a script task. So this question was, I have an SSIS package that uses VB code to open and refresh the Excel file, save it and close it, and then load the Excel data into a database. The package worked fine for me on my machine, but doesn't work on the POC server. The server has Excel 2016, 64-bit. So this one, unfortunately, I won't be able to give you a quick answer here because I have to kind of see what the script is doing and kind of dig into that a little bit. But usually what the scenario is here is if you're requiring it to open and close Excel on like a remote server, I have had, I'm trying to think if I've done that before. I think I have actually. And there was some issues with doing that kind of on a remote server. I don't know if you've been able to schedule that on any machine and it work or what, but I think you might have some issues doing that on a remote server, if I remember right.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, I think I'll maybe I'll contact you later
Yeah.
regarding this particular one. And it seems like somebody was saying that the top end feature is under visualization.
Oh, under the filter section it looks like. Okay, so they're saying underneath filters, and then maybe it's the column type I'm using here. Let's bring in a different one here. Let's try, because it wasn't showing there, let's try profit here. So if I try and filter on profit.
Hey, Xiangwei, you are unmuted. Maybe you can talk. She said, well, this person was the one mentioned about the top end feature.
Sure.
Can you talk? Hey, Xiangwei, are you there?
Yeah, I guess probably Jagger not in the number column there. I don't know why it doesn't show up. Probably Jagger not I don't know, name, the city name or whatever to there. See.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So try it on, rather than trying it on, there it is. There you go, you're right. I thought you were right. I said I couldn't remember if that was a feature that had already been implemented or if it was on its way, but you were absolutely right. So then I can drag it in and tell it I want top by profit, for example, and hit apply. Yeah. Yep, you are absolutely right. Good call.
Sorry, I misled you at first.
Great. Any other questions we got, guys?
I think that's about all we have. Thank you so much for the
Not a problem.
wonderful presentation. We got a lot of people interested in this topic. This is a great session. Thank you so much, Kevin.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Yeah, we look forward for your next one.
All right. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Good night. Good night.